And record. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the 8th, I believe, session of the Inspire Success webinar series brought to you by the Stender School of Business and Technology. My name is Brianne Tepler and I am your host and facilitator. The Inspire Success webinar series consists of monthly or bi-weekly webinars with topics that relate to the graduate business and technology programs offered through the College of St. Scholastica. Today's session on mindfulness is presented by Bob Randall. Bob works with the MBA in Leadership and Change program. This program has now been moved to 100% online with virtual sessions on Tuesdays and Thursday evenings. The application is open for fall semester, so there's still time to apply if you'd like to start in September. And there's some new scholarship opportunities. You can reach out to myself or Bob for more information. You're joining today's webinar via Zoom. If you're new to this online platform for video meetings, please take note that your camera and microphone have been turned off and muted. We'll have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. You may unmute your microphone at that time or type your questions using the chat function on your menu bar anytime throughout the session. If you lose your internet connection, log off and call into the meeting using a phone. The phone number to call into the meeting was sent to you in your confirmation email. I've asked Bob to introduce himself, so without further ado, let's get started.
Great, thanks Brianne. I'm just delighted to be with all of you today. And as Brianne said, I'm a professor in the MBA Leadership and Change program. And if you're interested in getting kind of an avant-garde MBA degree, we'd love to talk to you more. It's a very unique program. I come to you from St. Paul today, and I have taught here on the St. Paul campus for St. Scholastica for a number of years. And prior to that, you'll learn a little bit about me as we go through the program today. I did do my doctorate in organization development at St. Thomas, and worked in private industry for about 25 years. So excited to spend time with you on this topic and on mindfulness and how it improves well-being and performance. It's really an emerging topic. It's continues to gain popularity, and it really dovetails nicely with recent webinars that were conducted by Bob Hartle, who is our program director in the MBA Leadership and Change program, the program in which I teach. And in Bob's Appreciative Mindset webinar, we learned how to change the narrative in organizations from a deficit mindset to one that focuses on problems, to one that builds on strengths and how we're doing in that area in a way that we're pouring energy into our work rather than having the energy sucked out of us. So mindfulness dovetails nicely with that. I think you'll see that as we go through the materials today. So to start out with today, this is going to be a little bit interactive. We have a few points where I'll ask you to participate via the chat room, and then we have a couple of polls that we're going to interact with as well. And as Brianne said at the end, we'll have time to have a conversation. But today I want to have you think about what gives you energy. And one way to think about this is to consider the concept of flow. And flow is when time stands still. It's when we're completely present within the task at hand. It's really when we're in the zone, when we're doing something we love. So using the chat box, if you could describe the last time you were in flow, what it was that you were doing. I'd love to learn more about the people who are on the call today by telling us, you know, what is it when you got into flow, what is it that the thing that it was that put you into flow? For some people, it's exercise. For others, it's a hobby that they love or some kind of work that they love. What is it for you? And it's when we take ourselves, and we'll have Brianne jump in and share some of those with us here in a second. But as those come in, I want you to kind of think about it's when we take ourselves somewhere and get out of our head. We're suspending our fears, our insecurities, and our ego. We're really just enjoying the moment. There's no judgment, no worries. It's pure joy. It's really one way to achieve mindfulness. So Brianne, do you want to share a couple of the responses that came in?
Well, they are coming in at rapid pace, Bob. We've got some folks who are saying things like baking, yoga, crafting, four-wheeling, mountain bike rides, but we even have some that are saying meditation. So it looks like we've got some folks who have participated in that. Developing a new idea and organizing it. So instead of attaching it to a specific item, it's that activity of development and organization.
Great.
Another one said visioning and brainstorming about the future. Well, there's some great responses here.
Yeah, it's such a wide variety because we're all such different human beings, but it's really, really interesting to see what kind of puts people into that place. So thank you for those responses. And what I want to and so flow is really a form of mindfulness. And Brianne, if you want to launch our first poll for today, I'd like to understand from everybody as well, sort of what they do when it comes to mindfulness. When was the last time you practiced mindfulness or meditation? So if you want to kind of consider participating in the poll as I talk a little bit about what mindfulness is, that'd be great. But in a sense, we're mindful when we're in flow and we're completely present and accepting. We're really at peace. And this quote up above has been really synthesized from many sources to provide a definition of mindfulness. And as it says, mindfulness is the ability to focus one's awareness on the present moment while accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and physical sensations without judgment. It really comes from the Buddhist tradition. It's not a dogma, it's a practice, and it's a state of being, but something we call a practice because we're never really there. It's something we continually work on. So let's break that down for a second before we share the results of the poll. And according to a Harvard study, less than 50% of our time on average is spent paying attention to the present moment. So our minds wander, they think about the past, the future, creating meaning out of what's happening rather than staying in the moment. So have you ever arrived somewhere and you wondered how you got there? Or you've ever been in a conversation and your mind was working on what you wanted to say rather than what the other person was saying? Or worse, maybe you went to Jamaica while the other person was talking. Going to Jamaica is my way of saying maybe your mind completely wandered off about a future vacation that you want to take, for example. Or even multitasking. So if you're ever try to listen and text at the same time, that would be obviously another distraction and getting out of the present moment. Or if you're trying to eat, watch TV, carry on a conversation at the same time, you got all kinds of things going on. So those are examples of not being present. And it's oftentimes that we don't train ourselves to be present. And that's when our minds get reflexive and they wander off. So we don't oftentimes even know that it's happening. And our lives become a reflex to the events around us rather than our lives being intentional. So accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and physical sensations without judgment, and thinking about that, acknowledging and accepting your feelings, we often suppress them or we're ashamed by them. And acknowledging and accepting thoughts instead of fighting or controlling them, that's the irony. Once we truly accept a thought, we can let it go. So we don't have to agree or endorse the thought, we just have to accept it for what it is. So Brianne, if you're able to share the results of the poll, I think it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. Let's see. So I'm going to hit end poll and then will it just publish?
Yeah. You might have to hit end poll and then share poll.
Results.
Yeah.
Here we go.
There we go. Oh, look at that. So we have a pretty good distribution here. It looks like 28% have practiced mindfulness today and about the same amount within the last week. 21% within the last month, a few within the last year, and then some people are in the never category. So that's very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And one research study I looked at showed that about 40% of Americans meditate at least weekly. And interestingly enough, 45% never meditate. So there's not a lot of middle ground there. Which is, I think, kind of interesting. People tend to either meditate on a regular basis or they don't do it at all. So it's kind of interesting. We're finding growth in this mindfulness movement. These numbers have come up over the last decade or two. And we kind of wonder why. I think it's because we look for purpose. Our world continues to go faster and faster, and we want to know ourselves better. We feel like sometimes life is passing us by. And we're also understanding the health benefits of meditation more and more, both mental health benefits and physical health benefits. And even many leading health systems are now integrating these holistic techniques into their practice. And to be clear, mindfulness and meditation is not an either or proposition. It's really additive to many of people's spirituality and additive to our Western health practices that most of us are familiar with. So we can keep that in mind. So some common methods of mindfulness, I tend to focus on meditation and yoga because those are two of the most common. And I'd like to maybe understand a little bit better where you're coming from when you try to practice mindfulness. So Brianne, if you'd like to launch the second poll that we have for participants today, we can put that up for people to participate in. So when was the last time you practiced mindfulness? No, the second poll, Brianne.
Hold on a second.
Yes, sorry.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries.
And launch.
There it is. What's your most common method of mindfulness? And so obviously there are many ways to practice mindfulness, and meditation and yoga are quite well known, and some of them overlap with each other and can be combined. So for example, many yoga instructors will include a meditation at the beginning or end of their yoga practice. And breathing is often a part of yoga or meditation, but it can be practiced on its own as well. And some people will take a few moments once or several times a day to breathe and just be present. And many will combine gratitude with their morning intention or evening reflection, and they try to start their day or go to bed being thankful for something. So these are some common ways that people practice mindfulness today. And remember, we call it a practice because it's not something that I have to do, but it's something that becomes part of what we do. It's not really a belief, but it's really a way to be. So Brianne, if you want to share the results of this poll, it'd be interesting to see how people practice mindfulness in this group. And they probably do it in a number of different ways, but you were forced to kind of choose one, and it looks like practicing gratitude was the top one, with 33% of you saying that was your most common form of mindfulness, and the second one being breathing exercises. So that's kind of interesting. I think in most studies and polls that I've seen, meditation and yoga typically rise to the top, but again, there's a lot of overlap, so I can see how people might practice gratitude and at the same time also practice yoga and meditation. So thank you for sharing that. And we will now actually engage in a meditation ourselves. So this is really a neat meditation that I found helps us really become more present in the moment. And there are 5 steps to it. And really helps you access your senses, and it helps you become more present. So if you're interested in participating, I'd invite you to become part of the meditation. It's about 3 to 4 minutes long, and I'll kind of guide you through it for how this can help you become more present in the current moment. So the first step is to see. So you want to find 5 things within your sight, or 5 things you might imagine if you happen to be sight impaired. So it could be a plant, your desk, a coffee cup, art, anything around you or that you can imagine. So now look at or imagine the object and just breathe in slowly through your nose as you stare at the object or imagine it in your mind. Hold your breath for 1 moment and exhale slowly through your mouth. So now find another object and breathe into it slowly through your nose, hold, and exhale slowly. So now find a third object, breathe in, you hold for a moment, and exhale slowly. Now find a fourth object, and you breathe in, and you hold, and you exhale slowly. Now finally look at a fifth object, and breathe in, hold, and exhale slowly. Now I'm going to ask you to find 4 objects that you can touch that are within your reach. It could be a book, a piece of clothing, your desk, really anything. And we're going to do the same thing. So I'll ask you to take that first object and put your hand on it. And as you touch the object, I'd ask you to breathe in slowly, hold your breath for 1 moment, and exhale slowly. Now touch a second object and breathe in, hold for 1 moment, and exhale slowly. Now find a third object and breathe in, hold, and exhale slowly. And now the final fourth object, if you could find that to touch it, I'd ask you to breathe in, to hold for a moment, and exhale slowly. Okay, the next sense we're going to access is hearing. So I'd ask you to quietly listen to the space around you. Or if you're hearing impaired, imagine a sound. What do you hear? Could be a clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, a bird chirping. So I'm going to ask you to do this one on your own, and I'd ask you to find 3 sounds to have you breathe into, to hold, and exhale. So I'll give you a few moments to do those 3 sounds on your own. Okay, now I will ask you to do our 4th sense, which is smell. So I'd ask you to imagine 2 of your favorite smells in the world. For some people, it's fresh cut grass. For others, it's fresh ground coffee or a cake baking in the oven, a flower. It's up to you. So I'd ask you, again, to breathe into those 2 smells. Breathe in, hold to the first smell, and exhale. So I'll give you a couple of moments to do that to 2 of your favorite smells. Now finally, we're going to do taste. And I'd ask you to think of your favorite food or beverage and just really imagine that it's in your mouth and you can really taste it. And I'd ask you to breathe in to that taste, hold your breath for 1 moment, and slowly exhale. Great. So this is a pretty quick meditation to help get yourself into the present moment by accessing your senses. So the goal is to be here and now in the present moment. And if you wish, please put a word or a phrase into the chat box that helps describe how you feel now as a result of the meditation. As you put those in, I'd invite you to use this exercise to quickly get in that present moment at various points during your day. And before we move on, maybe we'll have Brianne, if you wouldn't mind, maybe jumping in and sharing some of the responses.
Yeah, absolutely. They're coming in really quick, and the top ones seem to be calm and relaxed. I like this one. Michelle says super chill. I like super chill. Less distracted, more relaxed. And then this is really great, more whole. So I think that's a great, oh, another person said whole.
Oh, that's great.
Aware is another one.
Oh, fantastic. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for your responses and participating. We'll have one last meditation at the end of the presentation. So we'll do this, a different one at the end. But I think what I'm going to move into now is a little bit more on the benefits of mindfulness. So I've had the opportunity over the last 7 or 8 years to do a fair bit of research on this topic. And there are various levels of mindfulness. And one that I experienced a while ago is a deeper form of mindfulness. And it occurred for me when I was in my doctorate program in organization development. I had an instructor who was very well educated in this area. And she included several elective courses in our doctorates on a topic called energetics. And this is Dr. Ala Hiori, and she's an amazing instructor. And she also happens to be an adjunct faculty member for us in the MBA Leadership and Change program here at St. Scholastica. And so when I did my doctorate work, she was one of the program directors, and she ran what was called at the time the Energetics Institute, where people learned about mindfulness through the lens of ancient Eastern tradition as well as quantum physics. So I did my dissertation on this topic, and I conducted a phenomenological study into the transformational learning people experienced as a result of their learning at the Energetics Institute. So that's a bunch of really long words that basically says what was their common experience through their learning at the Energetics Institute. And what I found in my dissertation work was that it was a really transformative learning experience for people as they relied less on their ego as a guiding force in their lives and more on their soul. So it went really, really deep with people. The ego, we found, is really driven by fear and insecurities. A lot of comments that came through is like, before I went through this, I really thought my spouse made me angry, or I'm afraid of switching jobs. And so people kind of got wound up into those thought processes. And they learned that the soul was really put on earth to learn and to grow. So the questions changed over to, how do I become more whole, as in wholesome? And what is this world trying to teach me, rather than blaming the world for what it was doing to me? So the three main learnings that came out of that were self-healing and empowerment. And that was where people learned to live their lives from the inside out, meaning they became less reliant on others and stopped living a life of distraction, of conformity, and even coercion. If you even think of maybe even a parent or a boss, and they might have been allowing others to coerce or overly influence their lives, especially as an adult. And then the second learning was being interconnected. So people discovered that they live in more of a quantum or a spiritual world where the molecules in our bodies are always moving. So you know your body is a verb, and that seems kind of weird, right? It's not a noun, and that's because 98% of your body's atoms change out each year. That's really mind-blowing for a lot of people. They don't realize that their atoms are always changing out through breath, through food, through the energy that they're creating. And it's very, very interesting. So you share these molecules with past and present people and things through the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the food that you eat. So people ended up, once that really became part of their mode of thinking and their belief system, they lived in more harmony with each other and the world around them. When they gained that new worldview. So the interconnected piece was really important. And then thirdly, they were able to access their intuitive intelligence. And so this is just knowing and trusting your inner voice and really knowing the difference between, intuition, which comes from your soul, and the difference between that and your head voice, which can come from your ego, perpetuating fears, kind of the fight or flight brainwaves that come through. Which we'll talk about more in a second. So intuition really serves our purpose, while fears fuel more of our survival. So if you think about it that way. So through deep levels of mindfulness, we found really powerful benefits for people in my dissertation work. And currently I'm working on some research about how mindfulness promotes positive group dynamics when groups of students become more mindful. And I'm researching the relationship between mindfulness and key leadership competencies as well. So how we know mindfulness helps people form more trusting relationships, and we hope to discover other aspects related to leadership and mindfulness going forward. So a few other, other research studies that have been done in this area, I'll just kind of give you some interesting information along that. One is on brain science. And by the way, these slides are going to be available to all of you after the presentation. And I have the references listed at the end of the slide deck as well. But many researchers have studied the brain and when people are under a state of mindfulness. and how their reactions are when they're under mindfulness versus not being under a state of mindfulness. And stress buffering is one of those. And stress buffering helps us deal with stressful situations in more productive ways. For example, when I'm under stress, I'm more likely to lash out at others, be short with them, maybe project my stress onto them, where mindfulness helps us continue to function in more supportive ways. So that's a way stress buffering helps us. And stress regulation helps the brain remain more open when we're under stress. For example, if you've ever been under stress and you froze, or you wish you would have said something that you didn't say, it might mean that stress closed your mind versus being in a mindful state. You might have been in a better state to be able to respond the way you wished you would. And then keeping the fight or the flight response at bay is another benefit of mindfulness. This keeps us more engaged with a task that needs to be done, but may not be one that we enjoy doing. And then finally, mindfulness is shown to have positive, as I mentioned earlier, health benefits, kind of improving the immune system. That's been proven through many studies as well in patients in hospitals, for example. So in more of a work environment mode, some other benefits of being mindful. I just talked about the brain benefits. These are other behavioral benefits that we see in the work environment. And the first one is to be more resilient. So in this particular case, you have a new lens in which to view a situation. So meditating and mindfulness provides insight and the ability to work through thorny situations so you can overcome challenges rather than be blocked by them. So that's one of them. The next one is paying attention. So I mentioned earlier that we really struggle with this, especially in today's world and with handheld technology and whatnot. And the ability to stay focused is becoming more and more important when we're here to do our jobs and to do our work. Stronger cognition is another benefit. So again, making your brain work more efficiently helps us work through information overload in a cluttered world. So the efficient brain is really helpful. And then improved emotional intelligence helps us manage emotions in stressful situations and really be our best selves when it really, really matters. It's all about self-awareness. So I'm more aware of my triggers and how to manage my emotions when they bubble up in those stressful situations. And then operating well with uncertainty. So many people really yearn for stability, but in this world, it's not realistic. The world is changing all the time, especially in today's environment. And there's been one of the most unique studies I ran across was on a study with Navy SEALs that my colleague Amy Johnson gave to me. And that study found that the most mindful SEALs embrace change and uncertainty. So in other words, they don't run from it, they run toward it because they thrive on it. So mindfulness helps them embrace that. So I believe when we're in touch with ourselves, we better understand our own power and strength. So when change is occurring, we respond with we got this, we can grow and learn from this, we can come out better on the other end, rather than feeling like a victim of change. So those are many of the benefits of being mindful. And another way to think about how this works is through the ladder of inference. So this is a concept that Chris Argyris developed, and Chris Argyris was a pioneer in the field of organization development. And he developed this ladder of inference when he noticed that leaders often held beliefs that they really couldn't validate. So in other words, they held these beliefs that were not founded on solid data. So he noticed that often when people jumped to conclusions and skipped several important steps when forming their beliefs and taking action, they came to the wrong place. So he developed the ladder of inference to help us think through how to avoid that proposition. So when done properly, the first thing a person does is they acknowledge an event, kind of like as a camera would capture it. And then the second thing they do is they acknowledge that they're only processing a select amount of the data. So our brain is sent 11 million bits of data every second by our body, but our mind can only process 50 bits per second. It's such a small fraction. So what are the chances that another person is going to process the same 50 bits out of 11 million bits of data that you process? It's almost unfathomable. So this is why we need to take a humble and curious approach at this step, and not necessarily know that we have all of the answers right away. So then the third step in this process is to interpret the data, again, knowing that we're interpreting just a select range of the data. And then we acknowledge that we're making some assumptions about the data, again, knowing that we may not have all the data, so our assumptions may be preliminary and they're changeable. And then we have an emotional and physical response to the data. We may form some beliefs, and then we take actions on the data. Unfortunately, what often happens is we jump right from the event to the actions I took. So an example might be, if we're multitasking, we're going 100 miles an hour, we're not being mindful. And if we're happen to be in traffic and let's say a red sports car cuts us off in traffic, we might automatically start believing that people in red sports cars are selfish and inconsiderate. We jump right up to the beliefs that are formed. Well, what really could have happened is, maybe we didn't consider all the alternatives because we wanted to jump right up to the top of the ladder. So what could have happened is maybe the person was sick or they're reacting to another car on the highway. There are all kinds of other scenarios that could have formed. So mindfulness helps us to slow down and suspend judgment. And instead of having these negative thoughts about something, which we may have very limited information about, and allowing our mind to be taken up by these negative thoughts for several minutes or an hour, or maybe even the whole day, maybe this event ruined our whole day. Instead of doing that, being mindful lets us live in a more pleasant state. And when we do get to our conclusions, we realize that we've collected a lot more data to help us get to that point. So that is one way to think through how mindfulness helps us get to better conclusions and to live in a more positive environment. So a couple more pieces of information before we get to our final meditation is going deep. So I mentioned my doctorate program and some other studies that have been done around quantum physics and mindfulness. And quantum physics might explain why a deeper sense of mindfulness really seems to work. It also could validate and explain why some ancient rituals like prayer and Buddhist meditation really seem to work for people. So let's just take the placebo effect, for example. Why does this work in up to 30% of cases? Scientists, Newtonian scientists, really have no answer for that. They don't really know why it works. They say, oh, your mind's playing tricks on you. But is it really? Maybe it's the fact that the power of positive thinking really helps activate hope in people in their minds and helps aid in the healing process. So other examples, how do we explain the unexplainable, such as a person who's given 3 months to live but miraculously overcomes a disease, lives a long life, or someone who's declared brain dead only to fully recover. Again, these are unexplained by traditional scientific methods, but quantum scientists and experts believe that the mind is much more powerful than we really know, and perhaps it can really influence our health and our world, really not dissimilar to what clergy might say about prayer, for example. If we all focus on positive prayer in our world or on something going on, good things oftentimes happen. And if we pray for, for example, the good health of ourselves or others, we're more likely to see good results. So we don't know enough about quantum physics because it's a relatively new field of science, but it may help explain some of these answers. And as Greg Braden says here in this quote up here, Greg Braden has written several books on this topic. It's a documented fact that human consciousness influences quantum energy, the stuff everything is made of under certain circumstances. So these atoms these 7 billion atoms that we're made up of can perhaps be influenced by positive thought. Um, so again, as I mentioned earlier, 98% of these atoms are exchanged every year. So you almost completely have a new body every year, which is kind of strange to think about. But if you could influence the atoms that entered your body, you can to some degree with the air you breathe, the food you eat. But by doing so with a positive mindset, you might be able to influence and attract the atoms, the good energy into your life while exhaling the negative energy out of your body. So some Newtonian scientists are skeptical, but many quantum physicists are latching onto this idea as a way to explain ancient traditions, spirituality, and more recent scientific studies. So we'll certainly learn more as science catches up. But in the meantime, there's evidence showing that mindfulness can influence those 7 billion atoms in our body that are constantly changing. So some of the research done on how people can use mindfulness in organizational leadership and change come from a couple of different areas. So some things that we teach in our program is use of self, for example. This is how we show up at work. And in leadership and organizational change, we might be working with a method of change, but as a facilitator or practitioner of change, we're as much the instrument of change as anything. So our own awareness, ourselves, the situation will help us managing the changing conditions much more effectively when we're in a more mindful state. And then we often talk about humble inquiry, and this is a method of helping and coaching and working with individuals and groups. And we typically are helping them through a thorny or wicked complex problem. And to do this effectively, by using inquiry, we really need, and to do it humbly, we need to really check in with ourselves and understand our own psychodynamics, to understand that our ego, and ensure that our ego doesn't seep into the engagement. And then another interesting approach is to harmonize the group. And this is one particularly effective mindfulness tactic, is to harmonize a group before you engage with them. So particularly when a group has a lot of conflict occurring with each other or your own engagement with them, you can visualize the interactions ahead of time, send good energy out into the room, and make it available to those in the engagement before you go in, balancing the energy before you start with them. And practitioners and leaders, there have been studies done on this, have found this a very helpful approach when they're facing stressful situations in a challenging group situation. They believe the engagement ends up being more productive when they harmonize the group ahead of time. Double loop learning is a process that we also talk a lot about in our MBA program. And this is where we move beyond trying to fix the existing system, and we question whether the system is the right one in the first place. So that might lead into the culture of the organization, the underlying assumptions of the culture, and this can be really challenging to do because it's oftentimes very hard to identify what the operating assumptions are of a culture or an individual. And mindfulness helps us go deeper with people in groups because we're able to connect with them better. We're able to understand them better and really see them through a new lens. It's almost like putting on 3D glasses when you're working within a group and a culture, because a lot of things go unsaid. Authentic leadership, of course, is another thing that when things get stressful and challenging, and of course they will at some point if you're a leader, then we must rely on our core beliefs to help guide us. And in a strong culture where everyone is going one way, but our intuition is telling us to question the status quo, or we need to access our inner voice and strength, practicing mindfulness on a regular basis helps make that a more natural process and gives us the courage to speak up. And then lastly, systems thinking, again, is another way to look at things and see them from a new perspective. It's based on Gestalt theory, which comes from psychology, the field of psychology. And it helps us look and see how patterns are emerging, what's not being said, the body language is telling you, what coalitions might exist within a group. And it gives us a hyper sense of awareness to give us perspective on where conflict might be occurring or resistance to change may be coming from, and other motivators are happening within the organization. So, so these dovetail very, very nicely to help us build our own leadership and skills to be very effective in organizations as well. So how do you build a mindful practice? Well, there are a lot of different ways. I kind of put them into 3 buckets here, but meditating on your own, of course, is a very common way. So a lot of experts say, hey, try meditating or doing yoga 1 to 3 times a day for a total of 30 minutes. So if you're going to meditate maybe 10 minutes in the morning or 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening, that type of thing, or maybe 10 minutes midday, morning and evening. Those are ways to do that. I know Deepak Chopra is one of the leading minds on meditation, and he often says that, if people say they don't have time, 30 minutes to spend on meditating, he says that they should probably spend an hour then. So that they probably need it more than most. But there are other ways to do that. And another great way is to do this within group meditations too. So there are meditation centers, yoga studios. You can always consider forming a group meditation club with friends or coworkers as well. And then a lot of people create reminders for themselves. So it could be even putting something on their smartphone, like to go off to remind them to meditate or to just be present. And it could be as simple as taking these 10 breaths and expressing gratitude for 3 things. It might only take a minute, but it helps maybe center you when you most need it. And then within organizations, we're seeing more and more work being done to create cohorts of employees to experience meditation together. And that's a great way to build community and a great way for people to share their own experience in a more safe environment. And more organizations are also offering yoga classes, for example, on site or through other services. People are working from home. And we're also teaching people to, consider doing a check-in at the beginning of the meeting or even a short meditation or an expression of gratitude. I know the classes I'm teaching right now will do a 5-minute meditation before we get started because most of the students are coming from work into their evening class, and it's a great way to kind of transition into that. So my last slide and my promise to you was to do a mindfulness exercise at the end of the webinar today. So if you'll indulge us here, I will guide you through a mindfulness exercise and a meditation. So with that, I will invite you to take a seat if you're able, with your back straight and your feet on the floor. And I would invite you to take a deep breath in through your nose and to hold it for 1 count and release all the tension out of your body by exhaling through your mouth. So take another breath in. Again, you're bringing in all life energy. You hold for 1 count and again, release all the tension out of your body by exhaling through your mouth. Okay, let's resume our normal breathing pattern, knowing that each breath in brings you life energy from the universe, and each breath out expels tension from your body. And if you haven't already done so, and you're able, I would invite you to consider closing your eyes at this point. And as you do so, I would invite you to imagine the back of your eyelids are a movie screen. The screen is empty right now, but you're going to project something onto the screen. So think about something that you're grateful for. It can be anything. Just something that you're grateful for, and project that onto your inner screen. What does that image look like to you? What colors stand out? How does the image make you feel? Now imagine the image is growing. It's getting bigger. It's growing on your screen. It's doubling in size. Maybe it's tripling in size. It's permeating your body. The image is transcendent. Its atoms move across space. It's moving through you. It's getting larger even than you are, and it's getting so big it fills up the entire room that you're in. In this moment, the image of gratitude has populated the cells in your body and space around you. This image of gratitude is going to remain with you throughout your entire day. Now take a deep breath in, hold it for a moment, and exhale slowly. Your inner screen rolls up, and you take another breath in, hold for 1 moment, exhale slowly. Okay, return to normal breathing, and when I count to 3, you're ready to open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. Great. Well, thank you for joining our mindfulness webinar today. I'm going to, here are the reference pages for you. But I think at this point, it would be great to hear what your experience was, what questions or comments that you have. I'll stop sharing my screen. And Brianna, if it's okay, we'll open things up for questions.
Absolutely. I'm still recording, so I'll keep that going so folks that missed this can hear the questions. You can either type your question in the chat or you can speak your question if you unmute your microphone.
And if you're really brave, we would love you to turn your camera on because we love to see your beautiful faces.
All right, looks like there is a question. Oh, somebody said this was definitely new for me. Yes. Someone else said, thank you for your time. One person said, I'm impressed how well guided meditation can work in a virtual setting.
I'm glad it worked because I haven't done too many of these on the virtual world. So I'm glad it worked for people.
Bob, do you recommend any of the apps that are available for guided meditation or any of YouTube videos or other media?
Yeah, there are all kinds of them. I don't really endorse any because I think they're all so good, but I personally tap into YouTube for a lot of my guided meditations, but there are some other wonderful apps that are out there as well. So, but yeah, if you just want to get some free ones on YouTube, you can just type in 10-minute guided meditation or something along those lines, and you'll have some wonderful ones pop up.
Great. We did get a question from Lynn. She said, what do you think of tapping?
I'm not an expert in that area, so I would turn it back to you and ask you what you think of it.
So Lynn, you can put your thoughts in the comment section. I just recently heard of tapping, and so I am also not very familiar with the practice. And let's see, while she's doing that, it says someone is recommending the Waking Up app, saying that one is awesome. A lot of great teachings on there. And let's see, if we wanted to implement guided meditation during our own virtual meetings, are there certain topics or meditations that work better than others?
That's a great question. I've been able to practice this with my classes that I teach. And I found that and I'm doing that in the virtual setting, I found that a good 5 or 10 minute breathing meditation is a good place to start. It's pretty straightforward, and it just allows people to kind of recenter and get in the moment. So that I would keep it fairly straightforward and simple, and maybe keep it kind of short. If it goes any longer than 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes it gets people, it takes away from other things that you need to do.
Sure. Krista brought up a great question. How do you not fall asleep? For those that are running, and then you have that meditation and you find that calm, how can you avoid those people that are just ready to zonk out at that point?
Well, that's why I usually keep it relatively short. Even 5 minutes, sometimes people are like, whoa, I kind of had to come to a little bit, but usually they don't go completely asleep. Usually they're in sort of a liminal state, which is sort of in between full sleep and consciousness. So, but if you do go, say, 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you might have some people nod off. So that, that might be something to consider.
Good point. Anna asked a question. She said, do you have any advice for people who have trouble quieting that inner dialogue, that ego?
Oh, that's so hard. Yeah, it just takes a lot of practice and consistency. It's kind of like exercise, in my opinion, and in my experience, is that if you get into a habit, over time, you'll see good benefits. And I notice when I don't meditate, say, let's say I go on a trip or I'm traveling or whatever, and I get out of my routine, I find like I'm off. And so I need to get back to it. So it's kind of like exercise that way. So I think that repetition you'll find will be helpful.
Yeah, you mentioned that your intuition, as you quiet the ego more, your intuition grows, and so you are able to, it's stronger. You're using that more, and so you can be intuitive on when you need more meditation.
Right. It's there for you, and because you've developed it over time. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. These are some great questions. I know my daughters have said to me before, "Oh, Mom, when was the last time you did yoga? Because you need it." Like they can tell when I need it.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Looks like Crystal's recommending the Calm app.
Mm-hmm.
And she said it's okay if your brain doesn't quiet. They recommend recognizing the thoughts, accepting them, and letting them go to deal with later, and that is difficult. And I've heard that some professionals have described that as compartmentalizing, or putting it in a compartment
Mm-hmm.
and putting it away, or shelving, some of that terminology.
Put it
What are
in a
your thoughts on that?
backpack, or yeah, there are different visualizations you can do with that. Some people are like, oh, just take that thought, put it in a balloon and let it go. And so yeah, it's that again takes time and practice. And that's why we call it a practice, mindfulness practice. So it's
Absolutely.
challenging. It is for everybody.
Great. I'm just seeing if there's anything else. We still have a little bit of time if there's more questions for Bob.
Is anyone brave enough to show their face and ask a question? Because it'd be fun to see some of the folks on the call here today too.
I see
No one wants to be
photos, but not a lot
first.
of videos.
Yeah, nobody wants to be that first one. Oh, the videos are blocked, they're saying. Maybe that's possible.
Oh, so on your video tile where you see your name, if you hover over that, there are 3 blue dots. You can click on that and then scroll down to start video, if you'd like to turn your video camera on. We do still have a little bit of time, so while those are asking
Yeah, we
questions.
can hang out and chit chat a little bit more. I think that, it's really interesting that the students that I work with this is really resonating with them. Oh, here was some cameras coming on. That's awesome.
Hi, my name is Travis. I have a question if you have a
Yeah,
minute.
great.
Great, go ahead, Travis.
So this kind of relates a little bit more towards what you kind of mentioned about changing the organizational kind of narrative and mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just kind of curious, in your experience, how do you, like, what are the key things that you really kind of get traction with organizational leadership when it comes to kind of promoting mindfulness and meditation in the culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my experience, it really depends on kind of what the leadership's underlying assumptions are. So if they're motivated simply by performance, then sometimes just showing them the benefits of mindfulness will get them to kind of buy into the idea of it, because they're like, oh, I can see how this is going to help our employees and ultimately help us be a better organization. If their motivation is more just about employee well-being and they kind of have their heart centered there, then of course, showing them about how this improves that aspect also can help. So I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but I would also encourage you to consider viewing the webinar that Bob Hartle did like a month or two ago on appreciative mindset. He
Okay.
had some really neat techniques around dialogue and dialogue circles and how to create a new narrative within the organization by creating the environment and the dialogue circle for people to have that conversation.
And I'm sorry, what was the individual's name again?
Oh, if you send me an email, I'll put my email in the chat for everyone, and you'd like Bob Hartle's presentation on a appreciative inquiry and the science one, those are two separate presentations. I'd be happy to send those out to you. So btepler@css.edu is where you'll send the email and say, hey, we want those other webinars about that other stuff. I'll send them to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for answering that question. That does help. It sounds like it's not a one size fits all, which makes sense. Just kind of thinking about how to build this more positive, mindful culture.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I don't see any brand new questions. Brittany did comment that Bob's presentation on dialogue circles was incredibly beneficial, and it is an effective tool, she said, and I 100% agree. I'm a graduate of this program at the college, and I always tell people that it gave me new filters to look through in all the work that I do. It calmed my shoulders, it calmed my own demeanor because I was able to see how and why things are happening. And I had different lenses or filters to see what was happening before me, what was unfolding around me. All right.
Great.
Lots of thank yous. I think we'll end it there. We're just a few minutes before the end. I'm going to stop the